The town of Ashwood was unusually quiet that late afternoon. A thin haze of sunlight filtered through the tall maples lining Main Street, casting long, restless shadows across the cracked pavement. Birds chirped intermittently, their sounds echoing strangely against the empty storefronts, and the faint hum of a distant lawnmower was the only other sign of life. Normally, this street would have been lively, with children riding bikes, shop owners sweeping doorsteps, and the occasional car passing by. But today it felt like the world had paused, as if it were holding its breath, waiting for something unseen to happen. Maria moved cautiously along the sidewalk, her fingers nervously twisting the strap of her worn leather bag. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the air itself had thickened into something she could choke on. Her chest tightened with every beat of her heart, and her mind swirled with thoughts she had tried to suppress for years. She hadn't planned to be here today. In fact, she had driven past this street countless times, always suppressing the urge to stop. But something, a nagging instinct she couldn't ignore, had drawn her back. As she approached the corner near the town's old police station, she froze. There, standing alert on the edge of the sidewalk, was a police dog. Its ears twitched with every sound, muscles taut under its sleek coat, and dark, intelligent eyes scanning the environment with unnerving precision. The dog's handler, a tall officer in standard uniform, held the leash loosely but with a visible tension in his stance. It wasn't the presence of law enforcement that startled Maria. She had lived near officers all her life, but the dog itself. A cold shiver ran down her spine, starting at the nape of her neck and coursing through her arms, making her hands tremble. Memories she had carefully buried deep within her mind clawed their way to the surface with the dog's every movement. She felt as if the air had thickened into a living, breathing entity, pressing against her chest, threatening to suffocate her. Her steps faltered, then stopped entirely. She looked around nervously, hoping no one noticed her sudden freeze, but the street was silent. Only the dog and its handler seemed fully aware of her presence. Her hands shook uncontrollably, a subtle but unmistakable tremor that made it impossible to steady herself. She gripped the strap of her bag as though it were a lifeline, but it offered no comfort. Her eyes kept returning to the dog, drawn by some invisible thread of memory and recognition. It was as if time itself had bent, carrying her back to that one night she had tried to forget, the night that had changed her life forever. The images came unbidden. Shadows, screams, and the unmistakable presence of that dog, somehow involved in everything she had witnessed. Maria's breathing quickened, shallow and uneven. She felt sweat prickling her brow despite the crisp autumn air. Each instinct in her body screamed at her to turn and run, yet another, more compelling force kept her rooted in place. She could almost hear the echo of the past whispering in her ear, urging her to confront what she had hidden for so long. Every step she had taken since that night had been an effort to avoid this moment, to suppress the memories and the guilt that weighed on her like a constant shadow. The dog shifted its stance, its paws scraping lightly against the concrete. Its head tilted slightly as though sensing her internal turmoil. Maria's stomach twisted. She knew instinctively, terrifyingly, that the dog remembered her, not just her presence but the event that had scarred her. She couldn't explain it rationally, and yet the certainty clawed at her mind. Her vision blurred as tears threatened to spill, and she swallowed hard, trying to force herself to maintain composure. But every attempt felt futile. She moved her lips slightly, as if to speak, but no words came. The silence of the street pressed in on her from all sides, making her hyper-aware of the smallest sound. A leaf skittering across the sidewalk, the distant bark of a dog in another neighborhood, the faint creak of the handler adjusting his stance. She realized with sudden horror that she was trembling in full view of the officer and the dog, yet she couldn't look away. It was magnetic, almost hypnotic, the pull of the past demanding recognition. Her heart pounded violently, a drumbeat she feared could be heard across the street. She felt exposed, raw, vulnerable. Every nerve in her body screamed that she was on the edge of something monumental, something she could neither control nor escape. The memories, the truth, were pressing forward, relentless and unforgiving. She remembered the man, the crime, the terror she had felt. And now, standing on this quiet street with the dog watching her, the past had finally caught up. Then almost involuntarily she raised her hand. Her fingers, still trembling, extended outward, pointing directly at the dog. The action was slow, hesitant, yet unyielding. She didn't know why she had done it, only that it felt necessary. As soon as the gesture was made, the world seemed to tighten around her. The dog's ears pricked fully upright, muscles tensing, and its gaze locked on her with an intensity that made her knees weak. The officer immediately noticed and stepped forward, cautious but alert, sensing that something extraordinary was happening. Maria's lips parted, her tongue dry, her mouth a desert of unsaid words. She could feel the eyes of invisible onlookers pressing on her from the edges of her consciousness. This street, this quiet town had been her refuge, her place to hide, and now it was the stage for a revelation she had not intended to share. Her mind raced, trying to organize thoughts that refused to be confined, trying to articulate something that had been festering for years. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she spoke. It's him." The words were fragile, like a candle flickering in the wind, yet they carried the weight of a decade of secrets. The dog stiffened, ears fully erect, gaze unwavering. The officer's eyes widened, the tension in his shoulders unmistakable. Maria felt the impact of her words reverberate through the air around her, touching everyone and everything in sight. She had spoken, yes, but she had also unleashed something far larger than herself, a truth long hidden, now unavoidable. Tears ran freely down her cheeks as the dam of years broke. Memories collided in her mind, images of that night rushing forward, shadows moving silently, whispers of betrayal, the terror of helplessness, and the undeniable presence of the dog, whose instincts had been tied to that fateful moment. She remembered everything now, every detail, every sound, every breath she had taken in fear. And she knew with a certainty that chilled her that her life had irrevocably changed in this single moment. The street remained silent except for her quiet, trembling breaths and the low growl of the dog. It was aware, somehow, of the magnitude of what had just been revealed. The air itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the next move. Maria's legs threatened to buckle beneath her, but she forced herself to stand tall, shoulders shaking but determined. The past had come calling, and she could no longer ignore it. Her eyes never left the dog, never left the symbol of the secret she had carried alone. The quiet street, the fatting sun, the distant hum of life, all of it had disappeared, leaving only her, the dog, and the immense weight of a truth that would soon ripple through the town, exposing everyone to a reality they had never imagined. And in that moment, with her hands still trembling and her heart hammering in her chest, Maria understood one thing with absolute clarity. Nothing would ever be the same again. Maria's hand remained extended toward the dog, trembling violently as if her very soul was trying to escape through her fingertips. The officer, whose name she vaguely remembered from occasional town meetings, stepped closer, keeping the leash taut but careful not to provoke the animal. The dog's growl was low, almost imperceptible at first, but it carried a weight that made Maria's stomach tighten. Her knees threatened to buckle, yet something inside her, a mixture of terror and necessity, kept her standing. She was trapped between her fear and the unbearable pull of a truth she had refused to confront for years. The murmurs of bystanders, previously restrained by the quiet street, began to grow. A man jogging nearby slowed to a cautious stop, his dog barking nervously behind him. A young woman pushing a stroller paused mid-step, the baby cooing innocently while the tension around them thickened like fog. Someone whispered to another, unsure whether to step closer or flee. Maria could feel their eyes on her, sensing something extraordinary, though none could comprehend the gravity of what had just been said. She felt exposed, vulnerable, as though every secret she had buried beneath layers of time was now visible on her skin, radiating outward. It's him," Maria repeated, her voice cracking on the second word. It was weak, fragile, almost like a confession to herself rather than anyone else. Yet the dog responded immediately. Its head tilted slightly, muscles coiling beneath its sleek fur, eyes locking onto her with a focused intensity that made her shiver. She could see the connection, not just instinct, not just training, but something almost inexplicably aware in the animal. The memory she had tried so desperately to bury surged forward. That night, the man, the screams, and the dog that had somehow been there, silently observing, guiding, recording everything with a mind beyond comprehension. The officer took a cautious step closer, voice calm but firm. "Ma'am, can you explain what you mean?" His eyes flicked to the dog, nodding the unusual tension. Maria's throat tightened further, and her words caught in the constriction like stones in a narrow stream. She swallowed hard, tears forming again at the corners of her eyes. The memory was overwhelming, the guilt, the fear, and the undeniable truth that had defined her life for the last 10 years. She opened her mouth, tried to find the words, and felt the world tilt around her. I saw him," she whispered finally, voice barely audible over the low rumble of the dog. "That night, the crime, the disappearance. He was there and her voice faltered, collapsing under the weight of the confession. She could feel the crowd holding its breath, waiting for the rest of the story, sensing something monumental unfolding. And yet she could not speak it fully. The words were too heavy, too unbearable to release all at once. The past had trapped her, and now the past was demanding release. The dog's growl grew louder, a resonant warning that seemed to vibrate through the pavement. It was not an aggressive growl aimed at Maria or the officers, but a signal of recognition, of awareness. Maria felt an almost supernatural connection between herself and the dog, as though it could see the events that had haunted her, could understand the truths she had kept hidden. Memories of that night replayed vividly in her mind. Shadows moving silently across the walls, the man's face twisted with fear or anger she could no longer distinguish, and the dog, watching, waiting, aware of everything that had happened. A child from across the street let out a startled cry, and Maria flinched, suddenly aware of her surroundings. People were gathering now, drawn by the tension, murmuring in confusion. Phones were pulled out to record the unusual scene, and snippets of conversation buzzed in the air. What's happening? Who is she pointing at? Why is the dog acting like that? Yet no one knew the truth, only Maria, only the dog, and only the echoes of a night long past. She felt trapped in the center of a storm she had unwittingly summoned, unsure whether to flee or stand her ground. The officer attempted to approach further, speaking gently. "Ma'am, we need you to calm down. Tell us exactly what you mean." Maria's gaze never wavered from the dog. Her lips moved, forming the words she had rehearsed in private yet had never dared to utter publicly. It's the man from the night, the one who disappeared. He's alive." The murmurs rose into audible gasps. The officers exchanged wary glances. The dog's alert stance confirmed what Maria had said. Something significant had indeed been unearthed. She swallowed hard, shivering, feeling a sudden wave of nausea. The past, which had always lurked at the edges of her life, was now fully present. Her hand remained pointed, her body trembling, and the dog's gaze seemed to pierce her soul. It was as if the animal was confirming not just her words but her memories, the unseen witness to a crime that had gone unresolved for years. Maria's mind raced. She had to speak more, had to reveal everything, but fear held her tongue in its iron grip. A woman from the crowd stepped closer, tentative. "Ma'am, do you mean what we think you mean?" Maria shook her head weakly, her hair falling in damp strands across her face. I can't, I need." Her words were broken, fragmented by tears and trembling lips. She could feel the eyes of the officers on her, expectant, demanding clarity, yet she could not give them the full story in that instant. The magnitude of what she had unleashed was terrifying. For years, she had lived with the weight of the truth. Now the truth was alive, staring back at her through the dog's unblinking eyes. The handler of the dog, a seasoned officer, knelt slightly, trying to calm the animal without breaking its focus. "Easy, boy, easy," he murmured, voice steady but cautious. The dog remained rigid, nose twitching, as if detecting an invisible thread of history connecting Maria herself and the long-forgotten crime. Maria's pulse raced. She could feel the surge of adrenaline mixing with years of suppressed fear. Her breathing grew ragged, chest tightening painfully. Yet amidst the terror, there was a strange clarity. The secret could no longer remain hidden, and somehow the dog had become the key to unlocking it. She took a shaky step forward, and the crowd instinctively retreated, sensing the charged tension. Maria's gaze never left the dog's eyes. She remembered every detail of that night, the street corner, the man, the screams that had haunted her dreams, and the way the dog had been present, silent but omniscient. And now, standing before her, the dog seemed to embody that memory, a living reminder of the past she could no longer deny. Her hand remained raised, fingers trembling violently as she whispered again, He did it, he." Her voice broke completely, swallowed by tears and fear. The officer straightened, calling softly into his radio, signaling for backup. The crowd murmured in alarm, some frightened, some fascinated. Yet Maria felt a strange sense of relief, the first in years, despite the terror clawing at her. She had spoken her truth, however fragmented, and the dog's presence confirmed it. She realized that this confrontation, though terrifying, was inevitable. The secret she had carried alone for a decade was no longer hers to guard. Something larger, unstoppable, was now in motion. And in that moment, as the sun dipped lower behind the rooftops, casting the street in elongated shadows, Maria understood the depth of what she had just unleashed. The dog growled again, low and resonant, a sound that seemed to echo through time itself. Maria shivered, not just from fear, but from the awareness that the past had fully arrived. The quiet street of Ashwood was no longer quiet. It had become the stage for a revelation that would change everything, and nothing would ever be the same again. The words had barely left Maria's lips when a heavy silence fell over the street. The dog's ears were pricked forward, muscles tense, as if every fiber of its being understood the gravity of her claim. "It's him," she had said, trembling, her voice barely more than a whisper, yet it carried the weight of a decade's worth of secrets. She repeated the phrase under her breath, each repetition a tiny confession to herself, each syllable forcing the past into the present. The world around her seemed to blur. The murmuring crowd, the anxious officers, even the sunlight filtering through the trees, all faded into a narrow tunnel that led only to the dog and her memory. The officer holding the leash took a cautious step closer, voice calm but probing. "Ma'am, who exactly are you referring to?" Maria's chest constricted painfully. Her mind raced, trying to organize the words that had eluded her for years. She could see the disbelief in the officer's eyes, the faint flicker of skepticism that hinted at 1,000 unanswered questions. And yet, she felt the dog's unwavering attention, like a silent reassurance that she was not mistaken, that the memory and the truth she had held for so long were real. I saw him," she whispered, the words breaking over her lips like shards of glass. "The man from that night, the one who disappeared, he's here. Alive, I know it." The officer's eyes widened, and he instinctively glanced toward the dog. The animal's posture shifted, alert, growling low and steady. It was an unusual reaction, even for a trained police dog, one that seemed almost intuitive, as though it remembered the events Maria described, remembered the terror, the crime, and the human who had vanished without a trace. The murmurs from the crowd grew louder. People craned their necks, trying to see the officer, the dog, and the trembling woman. Phones emerged, recording the unusual scene. Maria felt an acute awareness of every eye upon her, every heartbeat in the tense silence. She felt small, fragile, yet unstoppable, carried forward by the inevitability of the truth. Every memory she had tried to suppress clawed its way into her consciousness. The scream of the man, the shadows lurking in that fateful night, the way she had promised herself to stay silent forever. But now, the truth demanded release, and she had no choice but to speak. Her hand, still trembling violently, remained pointed at the dog. The animal's eyes bore into hers with almost human understanding, and she felt her fear and guilt intertwine with a strange reassurance. This creature had been present during the events she described, not as a mere witness, but as an active, knowing presence. She remembered clearly the night years ago, the flashes of light, the sound of hurried footsteps, and the subtle, almost imperceptible growl of a dog that had seen everything. The memory pressed against her chest, suffocating yet clarifying, demanding she speak fully. She began again, struggling to find words coherent enough to bridge the chasm of memory and the present reality. The man, he did it. Her throat constricted, cutting off her speech, and a tear traced a line down her cheek. The dog shifted slightly, almost leaning forward as if urging her to continue. Its growl softened but remained, a warning and a guide. Maria realized that she was not alone in remembering the night. This animal, trained and instinctive, shared her memory in a way she could never explain. The weight of years pressed upon her, but the dog's unwavering attention emboldened her to continue. The officer, sensing the significance of her struggle, spoke gently. "Ma'am, we need you to tell us everything you can remember. Take your time, but we need clarity." Maria nodded shakily, swallowing against the lump in her throat. She could feel the crowd pressing closer, curious, fearful, and skeptical, yet their presence was secondary to the force of memory consuming her. Every detail she had suppressed for years surged forward. The man's face in the moonlight, the sound of a struggle, the way the shadows had swallowed him whole, and the unmistakable presence of the dog, always observing, always aware. As she spoke, more memories surfaced, sharp and unrelenting. She remembered how the dog had followed the man silently, how it had responded to subtle cues only an animal trained to perceive danger and deceit could understand. She realized now that her fear and hesitation had been inextricably tied to the dog's presence. It wasn't merely a coincidence that this dog, standing now before her and the officers, had been present that night. It was a living witness, and Maria's pointing was recognition, acknowledgement that the past was awake, aware, and observing. The crowd leaned in, drawn by her trembling voice and the eerie focus of the dog. Phones were raised higher, recording, capturing her every expression, unaware of the magnitude of the truth unfolding. Maria's knees shook violently and she gripped the strap of her bag like a lifeline. Her breathing came in shallow, rapid bursts, each exhale carrying the weight of her decade-long burden. She had to speak. She had to reveal what she had hidden for so long. Otherwise, the memories would consume her entirely. "I saw him. He was there that night and no one knew. The police, the people, no one ever suspected, but I did." The dog's growl escalated slightly, a resonant sound that seemed to pierce the quiet afternoon. Maria felt a jolt of fear and certainty. The truth she had kept silent for so long was now visible, palpable, alive. And the dog, with its trained instincts, seemed to confirm her every word. Its stance, rigid and unwavering, lent credence to her story. The officer glanced around at the murmuring crowd, assessing the situation. "Ma'am, we'll need you to come with us," calmly. "We can investigate further, but we need to know everything." Maria nodded, though her trembling persisted. She felt both dread and relief, dread for what would happen next, relief that the secret had finally emerged from the shadows. For years she had carried this knowledge like a lead weight pressing against her chest. Now it was out, undeniable and unstoppable. Memories of the night flashed again, faster now, overwhelming in their clarity. She saw the man, face twisted in anger or terror, moving through the shadows. She felt the adrenaline, the fear, the helplessness. And she remembered the dog, ever vigilant, muscles coiled, aware of events no human could fully grasp. The realization hit her with terrifying force. The dog had witnessed it all. It had been the silent guardian, the invisible eye, the unspoken acknowledgement of a crime long hidden. Her voice quivered again, almost breaking. He tried to get away. The night they thought he was gone, but the dog, her words faltered as tears streamed freely down her face. The dog leaned slightly toward her, growling softly, a low rumble that seemed to echo the truth of her confession. The crowd shifted uneasily, sensing the tension, unsure whether this was fear, revelation, or hysteria. But Maria didn't care. She had to speak, had to release the truth, regardless of the cost. She took a shaky breath, gathering the fragments of courage left within her. He is alive. And this dog, it knows, it remembers, Her words dissolved into sobs as the enormity of her revelation crashed over her. The officer stepped closer, his voice steady but concerned. "Ma'am, take your time. We're here to help, but you have to tell us everything." Maria nodded, trembling, pointing continuously at the dog that had been the silent witness of a decade's worth of secrets. The crowd remained silent now, caught in the strange gravity of the scene. Maria felt their eyes, felt the invisible pressure of their curiosity, but she focused only on the dog. It was alive, alert, almost sentient in its understanding of the events she described. Her hands shook violently, yet she held the gesture, pointing at the living memory of the night that had haunted her for so long. The truth, finally spoken aloud, felt like both liberation and condemnation, a mixture that made her chest ache. And in that moment, the words she had whispered, "It's him," were no longer just a confession. They were a key. They had unlocked a decade of hidden memories, revealing a past that could no longer remain buried. The dog's gaze, unwavering and intelligent, seemed to affirm her every word. Maria understood then that the moment had changed everything. For herself, for the man she had spoken of, and for the town that would soon learn the truth. The sun dipped lower, casting shadows that seemed to stretch unnaturally across the street. Maria's body continued to tremble, but beneath the fear there was a strange clarity, a knowledge that she had acted, that she had spoken, that the past was now awake and undeniable. The dog growled once more, low and resonant, a living witness to what had transpired. And Maria realized that, though the revelation was terrifying, it was the first step toward something she had long been denied: the truth. As the officers and the gathering crowd processed Maria's trembling words, her mind drifted backward, pulled inexorably into the shadows of her past. The world around her, the murmuring people, the rustle of leaves in the wind, even the watchful eyes of the dog, faded into a fog of memory. She was 17 again, smaller, braver in some ways, more vulnerable in others. The night she had tried so desperately to forget surged forth in excruciating clarity, replaying every detail with unflinching accuracy. It had been a damp, moonless night in Ashwood. The streets had been deserted, save for the occasional flicker of light from a distant porch. Maria had been walking home from her part-time job at a local diner, her backpack heavy with the day's earnings, unaware that her life was about to change forever. Shadows clung to the corners of buildings, moving in ways that seemed unnatural. She remembered the sudden feeling of being watched, of eyes tracing her every step, a chilling awareness that she was no longer alone. Then she had seen him, the man. At first he had seemed ordinary, indistinct, the kind of figure one barely notices in the periphery. But something about him was wrong, unnerving in its subtlety. His movements were careful, deliberate, and yet desperate, as though he were hiding from someone or something. Maria froze, a chill crawling up her spine. She tried to pass unnoticed, but her presence did not go unrecognized. The man's head had turned sharply, his eyes locking with hers for an instant that stretched into eternity. In that moment, chaos erupted. A loud crash behind her, the sound of glass breaking, made her spin around. Shadows shifted violently as a struggle ensued. She saw flashes, the man grappling with someone unseen, the metallic glint of a weapon, the panicked cry of a stranger. Her heart had leapt into her throat, her knees nearly buckling under the weight of fear. And then, out of nowhere, she heard the low, resonant growl of a dog. The creature had appeared silently, its movements precise and deliberate, muscles rippling beneath its sleek coat, eyes locked on the unfolding scene with uncanny awareness. Maria remembered the terror that had consumed her. She had wanted to scream, to run, to do anything to escape, yet her legs had remained rooted. The man's face was etched into her memory. Pale, contorted with fear or perhaps with rage, she could never fully tell. The struggle had ended abruptly. The man disappeared into the night, vanishing into the darkness as if swallowed by it. Maria had remained, trembling, the dog standing alert beside her, growling low and protective, as though guarding the secret of what had just occurred. She remembered the aftermath vividly. The police had arrived shortly after, their flashlights cutting through the darkened street. Questions had been asked, but no one had suspected her. No one had known what she had seen. And the dog, trained for detection, had somehow understood the importance of the events. It had lingered alert, as though aware that a human memory was fragile, unreliable, and in need of corroboration. Maria had left that night with a promise to herself. She would remain silent, burying the memory deep, hidden beneath layers of time, fear, and guilt. Years had passed. Maria moved away briefly, returned to Ashwood, took jobs, and lived quietly. But the memory never faded. It haunted her dreams, invaded her waking thoughts, a constant shadow that grew heavier with each passing year. Every time she walked near the site of the incident, a chill would run through her. Every time she saw a dog with a keen, alert gaze, her stomach twisted. She had learned to avoid reminders, to live cautiously, to bury the fear beneath layers of routine and distraction. But the past, as it often does, waits patiently, ready to emerge when least expected. The dog in front of her now was not just a dog, it was a living witness. Its presence unlocked memories she had carefully suppressed for a decade. She remembered the subtle signs she had seen that night, the way the dog had sniffed the air, the slight growl that had warned the man, the tension in its muscles as if it had understood the gravity of the crime. It was almost supernatural, the way the animal had been present, observing, aware of events beyond human perception. And now, standing before her, it brought those memories back with relentless force. She remembered how the man had disappeared without a trace, how the town had whispered, speculated, and eventually moved on, how she had carried the burden alone, knowing the truth but powerless to act. The police had investigated, yes, but without evidence, nothing had come of it. Maria had lived with the constant gnawing of guilt, the knowledge that she had seen what happened and yet had done nothing to intervene. She had hidden her fear, hidden her memory, hidden the truth that had the potential to destroy lives. Her body shook as she recalled the exact moment she had left the scene that night. She had run, barefoot and terrified, her mind racing with every possible outcome. She had cried herself to sleep over and over, haunted by the man's face, the crime, and the dog that had witnessed it all. She remembered swearing an oath to herself, never to tell, never to reveal the secret that no one else knew. That oath had protected her, yes, but it had also imprisoned her, keeping her life in a constant state of tension and fear. And now, in the quiet street of Ashwood, facing the same dog, she realized the past could not be contained any longer. The animal's gaze seemed to pierce through her, as if confirming everything she remembered. It was not just recognition, it was a validation of the truth, a living testament to the crime, the man, and the secrets she had carried alone. Maria's trembling hand, still pointing, felt both heavy and liberating. She understood that this was the moment she had been avoiding for years: confrontation, revelation, and acknowledgement. She remembered the man's face in more detail now, the subtle cues of panic and desperation, the way he had moved with urgency. She remembered the glint of something metallic, the subtle struggle, and the fear that had consumed both of them, though he had been the perpetrator and she the witness. Her memories were vivid, relentless, a torrent of sensation and emotion she could no longer ignore. And the dog, ever present, ever vigilant, had been the silent anchor through it all, the keeper of the truth she had tried to hide. Maria took a shuddering breath, her mind and body locked between past and present. She realized how much the dog's presence had shaped her fear and memory. Its awareness, its instinct, its ability to perceive what she could barely articulate, had been both terrifying and oddly comforting. She had known instinctively that the dog had been there the night the crime occurred, but now she understood why. It was a guardian of the truth, a silent witness to events that no human memory could fully hold. As the flashback subsided, Maria's vision cleared, bringing her back to the quiet street, the murmuring crowd, and the officer standing tensely nearby. Her hand was still raised, trembling, pointing at the dog that had unlocked her memories. Tears streaked her face, but there was a strange clarity now, a recognition that the past, though painful, could no longer be hidden. The dog's unwavering gaze, the low growl that resonated through the air, and the officer's cautious attention all reminded her that the truth she had carried for a decade was finally being acknowledged. She realized then that speaking these memories aloud was the first step toward liberation. Every tremble, every tear, every whispered word had brought her closer to confronting what she had long avoided. The man from that night, the crime, the secret she had carried alone, all were now part of the present, impossible to ignore. And the dog, steadfast and knowing, had been the catalyst, the silent witness that forced her hand, her voice, and her memory into action. Maria felt a strange mixture of fear, relief, and resolve. The past was no longer a shadow at the edges of her life. It was here, alive and demanding acknowledgement. She understood that the events she had witnessed were more than personal trauma. They were a secret that affected the entire town, a truth that had waited patiently for her courage to release it. And as she steadied her trembling body, she realized that the dog, the officers, and the crowd were now witnesses alongside her. The moment was heavy with unspoken tension, yet it also carried a strange sense of inevitability. She had hidden the truth for so long, but the dog's presence had brought it forward, undeniable and unstoppable. Maria understood in a way she had never before that this confrontation, terrifying, overwhelming, and cathartic, was the only path forward. She would no longer hide, no longer suppress, and no longer allow the past to control her. The secret was alive, and now so was she. Maria's hands were still trembling as the officer standing before her took a cautious step closer. His eyes darted between her and the dog, searching for cues, trying to gauge whether she was in shock, hysteria, or telling the truth. Maria's chest heaved as she tried to steady her voice, to form the sentences that had been trapped in her throat for more than a decade. The murmuring crowd had grown, their curiosity sharp, their phones raised, capturing every quivering movement and broken word. Some whispered in disbelief, others craned their necks for a better view. "It's him, the one from that night," Maria whispered again, her voice gaining a fragile strength. The dog growled low and steady as though affirming her words, and the officer stiffened, exchanging a glance with another arriving colleague. This was not just a story of long-lost memories. It was a revelation, a claim that challenged the very history of the town. And Maria, despite the terror twisting her stomach, knew she had to say it all. She swallowed hard, fighting back tears. He's been hiding here in Ashwood. No one suspected. He did it. That night. Everything I saw. Her words were disjointed, fragmented by the trembling that coursed through her body, but the dog remained fixed on her, unwavering, a silent witness that lent credibility to her confession. Maria's voice rose slightly, the fear and urgency in her tone cutting through the murmuring crowd. She had to make them understand. The officer knelt slightly to meet her gaze. "Ma'am, we need names, dates, any details you can give us. We can't act on vague memories alone." Maria's heart pounded violently. She had rehearsed this confrontation in private countless times, but nothing could have prepared her for the immediacy of reality. She felt the weight of every hidden detail pressing down on her, demanding to be voiced. And yet, the memory of the night, vivid, terrifying, and precise, gave her the courage she had lacked for years. The man, his name is Peter Langley," she stammered, the syllables heavy with years of unspoken dread. She saw the officer's eyes widen slightly, a subtle but undeniable recognition of the significance of the name. The dog growled again, a low, resonant sound reinforcing Maria's claim in a way that seemed almost otherworldly. The crowd gasped audibly, murmurs rising into a cacophony of speculation and astonishment. Some faces showed disbelief, others horror. Some whispered urgently to neighbors, while others remained frozen, captivated by the unfolding drama. Maria's mind surged with detail. She remembered the man's face, the flicker of a knife under the dim light, the shadows dancing across the walls of the abandoned alley. She remembered the fear in his eyes, the panic as the dog had approached silently, the way he had disappeared into the night, leaving a trail of unanswered questions. Her voice quivered, yet she pressed on. He tried to flee that night. I saw him. The police, they never found him because no one knew where to look. But I knew. I've known all along." The officers exchanged another glance. "Ma'am, this is serious. You understand that accusing someone without evidence can be dangerous." Maria nodded, a shiver passing through her. "I know. I wouldn't say it if I wasn't certain. The dog, it saw it too. It knows." The officer's hand tightened on the leash, and the dog's growl became more insistent. It was as if the animal itself demanded recognition of what Maria had seen. For years, the dog had been the silent observer. Now, it was the living proof of a secret the town had never known. She began to recount the night in painstaking detail, every fragment of memory emerging with stark clarity. She described the wet, slick pavement, the sound of hurried footsteps echoing in the alley, the shadows that clung to corners like living things. She spoke of Peter Langley's frantic movements, his desperate attempts to hide, and the subtle cues that had betrayed his panic. She remembered the glint of a knife, the abrupt struggle, and the eerie silence that had followed, the silence that had allowed him to disappear into the darkness. As she spoke, the dog shifted slightly, stepping closer, growling low but steady. Maria realized that the animal had been the only witness besides herself. It had seen, remembered, and somehow understood the gravity of the crime. Her memory merged with the dog's awareness, creating a vivid, undeniable tapestry of events. The officers scribbled notes rapidly, their eyes scanning her face for signs of deception, yet the intensity of her fear and the dog's behavior left little room for doubt. The crowd watched in rapt attention, a mixture of fear and fascination etched on every face. Some whispered urgently, trying to make sense of the revelations, while others remained frozen, captivated by the unfolding story. Maria felt their eyes, their curiosity, their disbelief, but she focused only on the dog and the officers. The truth was all that mattered. Everything else, gossip, judgment, speculation, was secondary. Her voice trembled as she continued. I've been silent for 10 years, 10 years of nightmares. I've hidden it, tried to forget it, but I never could. That night he tried to get away. He thought he was gone, but the dog, it was there. It saw everything, it remembers, and now I remember too. The dog growled again, almost in affirmation. Maria could feel a strange connection between her and the animal, as if it had been guiding her all along, urging her to speak, to release the memory, to reveal the truth. One of the officers called for backup, their voice tense over the radio. Maria noticed the urgency in their tone and realized that her revelation had set events into motion that could no longer be contained. She felt a mixture of dread and relief, dread for what was coming next, relief that the secret was finally exposed. The years of fear and guilt that had weighed on her chest were lifted slightly by the acknowledgement of the dog, the officers, and the crowd. She had spoken, and now the truth had a life of its own. Maria's voice faltered, but she pressed on. He's still around. I've seen him in the shadows. He's hiding, thinking no one knows, but I know. And now you know. And the dog knows too. Her trembling hand remained pointed at the animal, the unbroken gesture a bridge between memory and reality. The dog responded with a low, resonant growl, muscles coiled, alert, as though confirming every word. The officers stepped closer, their expressions grave, realizing the enormity of what had been revealed. The crowd began to murmur louder, some moving back nervously, others edging closer, drawn by curiosity and fear. Phones recorded every second, capturing the intensity of the moment. Maria felt their attention but focused only on the dog, on the witness to the hidden crime, on the years of memory that were finally given voice. She realized that she had become both a witness and a messenger, tasked with revealing the truth that had been buried too long. Her tears flowed freely now, but her voice was steady enough to recount the final details she had suppressed for years. She described the way Peter Langley had disappeared into the shadows, the subtle movements that betrayed his presence, and the dog's silent observation. Every word, every gesture, every tremor in her hands was a thread weaving together the story that had remained untold. The officers listened intently, jotting notes, exchanging looks of understanding and concern. Maria realized that she had become a bridge between the past and the present, between memory and reality. The dog, the living witness, had made the truth undeniable. The secret she had carried alone for a decade was now in the open, acknowledged by authorities, the public, and the silent, watchful animal that had observed it all. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. She understood at last that the revelation of the truth could not be undone. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting elongated shadows across the street, Maria felt a strange calm wash over her. The fear remained, yes, but it was tempered by the relief of confession, the validation of memory, and the acknowledgement of the dog's silent testimony. The crowd, the officers, and the town itself had been given a glimpse into a hidden past that had long shaped their lives in unseen ways. Maria knew that the coming days would be filled with questions, investigations, and perhaps disbelief, but the secret was no longer hers alone to bear. The revelation spread through the town like wildfire. Maria's words, combined with the dog's unmistakable vigilance, had shaken the quiet streets of Ashwood to their core. Police radios crackled constantly as officers coordinated search efforts, canvassing neighborhoods, alleyways, and abandoned buildings. Peter Langley, once a shadow in the periphery of everyone's lives, had become a target. The urgency was palpable. Maria had given them not just a name, but a location of the last sightings, the history, and the knowledge that Langley was alive, something the town had long believed impossible. The dog, still under the officer's firm but cautious control, led the search. Its movements were deliberate and precise, nose low to the ground, ears alert. Maria followed at a distance, her heart pounding, every step a reminder of the night she had first seen Langley disappear. She was terrified but resolute. For years she had carried the weight of her secret alone. Now she was part of a mission that might finally bring justice. Each memory she recalled, each detail she had once buried, became a guide. The investigation team split into groups. Officers scoured abandoned warehouses, alleyways, and dense patches of the wooded outskirts surrounding the town. The tension was suffocating. Every shadow seemed to conceal Langley, every creaking floorboard or distant noise a potential lead. Maria's recollections, vivid and precise, allowed officers to focus their search strategically, marking locations Langley had used in the past. She could almost feel his presence in the shadows, a constant reminder that he was alive and aware, as elusive as the memories she had finally spoken aloud. Hours passed with painstaking scrutiny. Langley had become a ghost in his own hometown, and the dog's instincts were critical in narrowing the search. Every paw step, every sniff, every growl seemed to direct the officers closer to him. Maria's anxiety twisted with anticipation. What would happen when they found him? Could she face the man who had haunted her memories for a decade? And what if he resisted, fled, or struck again? Her stomach churned, but the dog's unwavering focus was a source of both comfort and terror. Then around dusk, a breakthrough. The dog froze, ears pricked forward, muscles tense, its growl low and warning. The officer holding the leash signaled for silence. Maria held her breath. The dog's gaze was fixed on a rundown warehouse on the outskirts of Ashwood, partially concealed by overgrown brush. Its tail stiffened, and it emitted a series of sharp, controlled barks. Officers moved cautiously, weapons drawn, advancing as the dog led the way. Maria felt her pulse spike. The air was thick with tension and dread. Inside the warehouse, shadows swallowed every corner. Broken glass crunched underfoot, and the smell of damp and decay filled the air. The dog's growl escalated slightly, directing the officers toward a faint sound, the shuffle of footsteps and a low, muttered curse. Langley had been hiding, and now the dog had found him. Maria's knees trembled as she stepped closer, the realization hitting her with both relief and fear. The man who had haunted her memories was finally within reach. Suddenly, Langley lunged from a shadowed corner, a desperate, wild figure, eyes wide with panic and recognition. The officers reacted instantly, moving in with precision. Maria froze, her heart leaping into her throat, memories of that first night crashing back with unbearable intensity. But the dog remained composed, moving with the authority and instinct of a guardian that had waited 10 years for this moment. It intercepted Langley, growling and snapping, holding him at bay until the officers secured the area. Langley struggled violently, shouting incoherently, but the combined effort of the officers and the dog kept him contained. Maria could hardly look away. The man she had feared, the shadow of her past, was now tangible, real, and vulnerable. She felt a mixture of terror and satisfaction. The danger was present, but so was justice. Every detail she had remembered, every instinct the dog had followed, had brought them to this moment. Once Langley was restrained, Officers began the process of searching him and the warehouse for evidence. Broken furniture, discarded items, and remnants of Langley's attempts to hide painted a picture of a man who had survived in secret, avoiding detection, and living on the edges of fear and paranoia. Maria observed quietly, noting how close the memory of that night aligned with the present reality. Every detail she had remembered had been accurate. The terror, the shadows, the movements, everything pointed to the same truth she had revealed to the officers hours earlier. The dog remained alert, occasionally growling and sniffing the corners of the warehouse. Maria realized that it had been more than a guide. It had been a protector, a living witness ensuring that the past was honored and the guilty faced justice. Her chest tightened as the reality settled in. The man who had haunted her memories, the secret she had carried for so long, the terror she had tried to suppress, all were finally being addressed. The years of silence were ending. Langley was escorted out, his movements restrained but defiant, his eyes scanning the crowd and officers with suspicion and panic. Maria followed at a distance, her body trembling with a mixture of fear and relief. The crowd, who had gathered outside after hearing about the unfolding events, watched in tense silence. Whispers filled the air, blending curiosity, disbelief, and the raw emotion of a community realizing that a long-buried secret had finally surfaced. Maria's thoughts returned to the dog, the silent force that had been the catalyst for this revelation. Without it, she doubted that the truth would have come to light so decisively. It had guided her, validated her memories, and now ensured that justice would be pursued. She felt an overwhelming gratitude toward the creature, mixed with awe at its instincts and intelligence. For a decade, it had observed, and now it had acted, bridging the gap between human memory and truth. Inside the warehouse, officers documented the scene meticulously. Every item, every mark on the floor, every discarded piece of evidence was logged. Maria assisted when asked, providing context from her memories that helped officers reconstruct Langley's movements over the years. The details she had suppressed for so long proved crucial, guiding the investigation in ways that standard police work could not. She realized that her memory, her trauma, and the dog's instincts had combined to uncover a story the town had never imagined existed. The sun had dipped below the horizon by the time the operation concluded. Langley was taken into custody, the officers securing him in a vehicle for transport. Maria watched silently, a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and lingering fear flooding her senses. The crowd dispersed gradually, whispers of disbelief and fascination trailing behind them. The dog remained at her side for a moment longer, its gaze steady and unwavering, then allowed itself to be led away with the officers. Maria felt a strange emptiness, as if the moment of revelation and pursuit had released a part of her that she had carried for years. As she walked home through the quiet streets of Ashwood, Maria reflected on the events of the day. The secret that had consumed her for a decade was no longer hidden. Peter Langley, the man who had eluded the town and haunted her memory, was finally apprehended. The dog, a silent witness and guide, had ensured that justice had begun. And she, Maria, had found the courage to speak the truth aloud, to confront her past, and to participate in the pursuit of a fugitive who had once seemed untouchable. For the first time in 10 years, Maria felt a measure of peace. The terror that had clung to her since that night was not gone, but it had been transformed. Her memory, once a burden, had become a tool for justice. Her fear, once paralyzing, had become a force for action. And the dog, steadfast and intelligent, had been the bridge between past and present, memory and reality, trauma and resolution. The night air was heavy with anticipation as officers escorted Peter Langley into the Ashwood police station. The small, dimly lit building buzzed with subdued activity, radios crackled, officers whispered urgently, and the lingering tension of the day's events permeated every corner. Outside, the last stragglers from the crowd had dispersed, murmuring to one another in disbelief. Inside, Maria waited, seated stiffly in the interview room, her hands clasped tightly together. Her heart pounded as she tried to steady herself. After 10 long years of silence, The moment had come when Langley would have to confront the truth. The door opened with a sharp click, and Langley was ushered inside. His face was pale, drawn tight with fear and anger, eyes darting around the room as though searching for an escape. He saw Maria seated across the table and froze, recognition flashing in his eyes. For the first time in a decade, he realized that the secret he had buried so carefully was exposed, and the witness who had remained silent was sitting directly before him. The air between them was thick with unspoken history, fear, and anticipation. The lead detective, a tall, composed woman named Officer Reynolds, gestured toward the seat across from Maria. "Mr. Langley, you have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in a court of law. We need you to tell the truth about the events of 10 years ago." Langley's lips twitched, his jaw tightening, but he said nothing. The silence was oppressive, and Maria could feel it pressing against her chest like a physical weight. Langley's eyes flicked to the dog, which had been allowed inside the station as part of the evidence team. The creature's gaze was unwavering, sharp, and intelligent, as though reading every thought Langley tried to conceal. The dog's presence seemed to rattle him. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his hands trembling slightly. Maria could feel the years of fear, guilt, and secrecy that had accumulated in him, and she realized that the moment of confrontation was already beginning to crack his carefully constructed facade. Detective Reynolds leaned forward, her voice calm but firm. "Mr. Langley, we have witnesses, memories corroborated by physical evidence, and a dog trained to detect the sequence of events that night. Your attempts to hide have failed. It's time to tell the truth." Langley's eyes darted between the detective, Maria, and the dog. The weight of the situation pressed on him, the years of evasion and secrecy collapsing under the undeniable presence of memory, evidence, and observation. Finally, Langley's shoulders slumped, and his voice broke through the tension. It wasn't supposed to happen that way," he murmured, his tone a mixture of fear, shame, and desperation. Maria's stomach tightened as the first words of confession left his lips. Every syllable was a confirmation of the memories she had carried for a decade, of the terror she had endured, and of the hidden crime that had shaped her life. The room seemed to contract, every heartbeat echoing with the weight of truth finally revealed. Langley continued, recounting events from that night with halting clarity. He described the argument that had escalated into violence, the panic that had driven him to flee, and the desperate attempts to cover his tracks. He spoke of the alley, the broken glass, the shadows that had concealed him, and the dog that had observed everything. Every word he uttered was a confirmation of Maria's memories, the hidden details she had long feared she would never reveal, and the truth that the town had never known. Maria listened, a strange mixture of relief and horror coursing through her. Relief that the truth was finally being spoken, and horror at the magnitude of what she had carried alone. Langley's words painted a vivid picture of that night, his fear and guilt palpable. For the first time, Maria saw the full depth of the events she had only glimpsed as a terrified witness. The terror she had suppressed for 10 years was now fully exposed, but with exposure came validation and a strange sense of liberation. The confession continued, Langley detailing every desperate decision he had made to evade capture. He had assumed that moving quietly, hiding in plain sight, and exploiting the town's forgetfulness would protect him. But Maria's testimony, coupled with the dog's instinct and the officer's diligent investigation, had dismantled his carefully constructed web of deception. Each word he spoke carried the weight of a decade of evasion and fear, a confession born from inevitability rather than remorse alone. Outside the station, news of the arrest and confession spread quickly. Social media buzzed with updates, the story capturing the attention of the town and beyond. The residents of Ashwood, many of whom had grown up alongside Langley and Maria, were shaken. Whispers turned into discussions, discussions into heated debates, and soon the story dominated every conversation. People struggled to reconcile the quiet, familiar town they had known with the dark secret that had been hidden in plain sight. Inside the station, Maria remained seated, her hands slowly unclenching as Langley's words continued. The dog, calm but alert, rested nearby, its presence a reminder of the extraordinary chain of events that had led to this moment. The room, once suffused with tension, now carried a sense of resolution, fragile but undeniable. Langley's confession had laid bare the truth, and with it came the first steps toward accountability. Langley's demeanor shifted as he recounted the moments of confrontation with Maria and the dog on the street. The fear that had once empowered him to evade capture had crumbled, replaced by a raw acknowledgement of his actions and the inevitability of consequences. The officers listened intently, recording every detail, aware that this confession would be critical in court. Maria felt a cautious sense of empowerment. She had survived, remembered, and spoken, and now the perpetrator was being held to account. After hours of confession, Langley was led away to a holding cell. The room seemed emptier, quieter, and Maria felt the first waves of emotional exhaustion settle over her. The town's reaction outside was mixed. Relief, shock, anger, and disbelief coexisted in equal measure. Many felt vindicated, finally understanding the strange undercurrents that had haunted Ashwood for years. Others struggled with the realization that someone they had known, perhaps even trusted, had been living a secret life filled with danger and deception. Maria exited the station later that evening, the cool night air washing over her face. The streets were quieter now, shadows stretching long under the dim streetlights. She paused, thinking of the dog now resting in its kennel, still alert even in moments of calm. The animal had been central to revealing the truth, bridging the gap between human memory and justice, instinct and investigation. Maria felt a profound gratitude, a recognition that without the dog, her memories alone might not have been enough. As she walked through Ashwood, she noticed the subtle changes in the town. Windows peered open cautiously, neighbors whispered behind curtains, and the familiar streets carried a new weight of awareness. The town had been altered by the revelation, the confession, and the long-buried secret that Maria had finally brought to light. And in the midst of it all, she felt a personal transformation. Fear had been transformed into courage, silence into action, and memory into a force for justice. That night, Maria reflected on the extraordinary journey she had endured. From the terror of that first night to years of hidden memory to the dog's remarkable presence, and finally to Langley's confession, she had experienced a full arc of fear, suppression, revelation, and empowerment. The town of Ashwood would never forget these events, and neither would she. The dog had been the silent witness, the officers had been the instruments of justice, and she had been the catalyst for truth. For the first time in 10 years, Maria allowed herself to breathe freely. The terror, guilt, and memory that had once imprisoned her were now part of a larger story of reckoning, accountability, and courage. The confession had not erased the past, nor did it diminish the trauma she had endured, but it had transformed it into a narrative that demanded recognition, justice, and closure. And in that, she found a fragile but profound sense of peace. The days following Peter Langley's arrest and confession were a whirlwind for Ashwood. The small town, once serene and predictable, now buzzed with a mix of relief, lingering fear, and the curiosity of its residents. News crews had arrived from nearby cities, drawn by the sensational story of a secret crime uncovered after a decade, with a witness who had finally spoken, and a dog whose instincts had ensured the truth was revealed. Maria walked the streets cautiously, feeling both empowered and exposed. The town that had been her home all her life now felt different, charged with an awareness that some darkness had existed just beneath the surface. Despite the media frenzy, Maria tried to maintain her routines. She returned to her work at the small local bookstore, arranging shelves and greeting familiar customers with the cautious warmth of someone navigating a changed world. The dog, now part of the town's collective story, was occasionally seen accompanying officers on the streets or attending demonstrations of its work in search and protection. Maria often found herself watching it from across the street, remembering how its presence had transformed her life. The bond she felt with the dog was deeper than words, an unspoken connection forged in fear, memory, and justice. The police investigation continued, with Langley's confession providing critical leads. Officers revisited old crime reports, corroborated Maria's memories, and examined Langley's abandoned hideouts for evidence. Each day brought new revelations, some small, some shocking. The town collectively felt the weight of a decade-long secret finally surfacing. While many residents were relieved at the capture of a dangerous fugitive, others wrestled with the realization that someone they had lived beside could hide such darkness for so long. Maria, meanwhile, began the slow process of healing. For years, her mind had been a prison, haunted by vivid memories of that night and the fear that had followed. With the truth now revealed and Langley in custody, she felt the first true sense of relief she had known. Therapy sessions helped her navigate the lingering trauma, and supportive friends offered both comfort and understanding. She realized that confronting the past had been the first, hardest step toward reclaiming her life. Every night, when the streets were quiet, she allowed herself to reflect on the events that had reshaped Ashwood and the personal journey she had endured. Community healing also became a priority. Town meetings were held to address public concern, reassure residents, and discuss ways to prevent future tragedies. Workshops on trauma, memory, and public safety were organized, emphasizing the importance of vigilance and mutual support. Maria occasionally spoke at these events, sharing her experience in measured, thoughtful words. Her testimony was not just about fear and trauma. It was about courage, memory, and the power of truth. She wanted others to understand that even the most hidden secrets could be confronted with bravery and determination. The dog became a local hero, celebrated for its instincts, loyalty, and crucial role in bringing Langley to justice. Residents often approached the officers to learn more about the animal's training and capabilities. Maria sometimes accompanied the dog and its handlers during demonstrations, quietly proud of the creature that had guided her through years of fear and helped her finally speak. The bond between human and animal had become symbolic in Ashwood, a reminder that courage, loyalty, and vigilance often come in unexpected forms. Maria also began to reconnect with her own past, visiting places she had avoided for years. The alley where she had first seen Langley, once a source of terror, now felt like a place of reclaimed power. She walked its length slowly, taking in the familiar sights, noting the way shadows fell, and reflecting on the journey that had led her from fear to resolution. The memories that had once haunted her now served as a foundation for growth and self-understanding. The terror had not disappeared entirely, but it had transformed into awareness and empowerment. Peter Langley's trial became a focal point for the town. Testimonies, evidence, and the dog's role were central to the proceedings. Maria participated, providing calm and precise recounting of the events she had witnessed. Her courage inspired others in the courtroom and the community, illustrating the profound impact a single witness could have when fear was replaced by determination. The trial revealed more layers of Langley's secret life, his attempts to evade capture, and the ways in which he had manipulated his surroundings. Each detail reinforced the importance of Maria's bravery and the dog's vigilance. As the trial concluded, Langley received a sentence reflective of the severity of his crimes. The town felt a sense of closure, though it was tempered by the lingering shock of what had transpired. For Maria, the conclusion of the trial marked the culmination of her personal journey. She no longer carried the secret alone, no longer lived in constant fear of shadows, and no longer allowed trauma to dominate her life. The truth had been revealed, justice served, and a path toward healing opened. In the weeks that followed, Maria allowed herself small joys she had previously denied. Walks in the park, quiet mornings with coffee, and conversations with friends became exercises in mindfulness and presence. She found herself smiling more readily, laughing more freely, and embracing the beauty of life that had once been overshadowed by fear. The town, too, slowly returned to its rhythm, though it remained forever changed by the events that had surfaced. Residents shared a quiet pride in the bravery shown by Maria and the dog, understanding that ordinary lives could intersect with extraordinary acts of courage. Maria reflected often on the lessons of that decade. Fear can be paralyzing, but truth has power. Silence may protect, but speaking out can liberate. Memory, even when painful, is a tool for justice and understanding. And courage, sometimes sparked by the smallest companions, a dog, a friend, or a silent observer, can reshape destinies. She realized that her life had been irrevocably altered, not just by the trauma she had endured, but by the resilience, determination, and support that had allowed her to confront it. Months later, Ashwood commemorated the events with a quiet ceremony at the park, honoring the dog and acknowledging the bravery of those who had brought the truth to light. Maria attended, standing quietly near the edge, her heart full. She did not seek the spotlight, but she felt a deep satisfaction in knowing that her voice, combined with the dog's vigilance, had restored balance to her town. Children played nearby, unaware of the shadows that had once haunted the streets, and adults shared conversations that blended acknowledgement with hope for the future. For Maria, life had shifted in ways she could never have predicted. The fear, trauma, and secrets of the past had been confronted, and in doing so she had reclaimed her own narrative. She had become a witness, a catalyst, and ultimately a survivor. The dog, her silent partner in truth, had been a reminder of the extraordinary ways in which courage manifests. And Ashwood, once ordinary, had been transformed into a town that understood the delicate interplay of memory, fear, and justice. On quiet nights, Maria often sat by the window, watching the streets below. The shadows no longer frightened her. She had faced the darkness, spoken the truth, and witnessed the power of courage. Langley's presence was no longer a looming threat but a closed chapter, sealed by confession and justice. The town, the dog, and the years of memory had all converged to teach her that even the most hidden truths could emerge, and when they did, they could change lives, for better or worse. Maria finally felt free. The secret she had carried, the fear that had shaped her existence, and the shadows of the past had been acknowledged, confronted, and transformed. Life in Ashwood began to normalize, yet the story of that decade-long secret remained woven into its history, a testament to courage, vigilance, and resilience. Maria had learned that bravery comes not only from facing others but from facing oneself. And in the quiet moments of reflection, she smiled, knowing that the future, though uncertain, was now hers to shape.